So my testimony, it really begins at the beginning, as everybody is birth. I'll just actually start there because my name is Israel, and there's a reason why I have my name. So my mom and my dad were talking about names, and my mom was reading a book called Run Baby Run. It's a book about a gang member who it's a true story. He's the guy, Nicky Cruz. He to this day is doing motivational speaking and all that about what he went through and what God brought him through. He was a gang member who was part of there was the Tutsis and the Hutus, kind of silly names, but he was a part of one gang, and one of his best friends was named Israel, and so my mom, whenever she heard that name in there, I think that's what brought her to the idea of Israel, and so she was talking about it with my dad, and my dad was like, he was kind of worried that the persecution was going to come into the world, and if my name was Israel, then I would be persecuted, and so they were more thinking in names like Isaiah and Isaac and stuff. But my mom was not thinking that way. She was just trying to submit to my dad's authority and more let him kind of decide. But she wanted it to be Israel, and but they didn't know if I was going to be a boy or a girl, so that was just the boy name option. And one day my uncle was in church, and he opened up a Bible, and he's not really like a Christian or anything, but he opened up his Bible, and he found Isaiah 44:5, which is tattooed on my hand. And he was reading that, and he came up to my mom and just said, "Hey, I feel like the Lord's speaking to me about this verse, and I just felt like I had to give it to you, and that it had something to do with your child that you're about to have." And so she felt like that was confirmation that it was going to be a boy and that it should be named Israel. And so that's exactly what happened. Obviously, I'm a boy, so I was born. And
his birthday's
yeah,
in a few hours.
My birthday is in 3 hours, 2 hours and 45 minutes. December 21st, 2001. It's the winter solstice. It's the day the Mayan calendar ended. They thought the world was going to end on my birthday. It's a special day. It's the darkest day of the year and all that kind of thing. But so when my dad was in the hospital room and he was the first one to hold me, he said that it just felt like there were angels around him that were just whispering Israel, Israel, and like they were just floating around him in a circle. And the Holy Spirit was all over him, and he couldn't really like say my name. And my mom was like, "So what's the name gonna be?" And he just was like, "I know what it is." And he was crying, and it was just a powerful moment for him. And so I was named Israel, and I grew up in a home that was good. I mean, there was dysfunctions in there, just like everybody, but my family is an incredible family, and they raised me really well. Like, I mean, so many people have told me, "You must have been raised well," because, God really got me at a young age. And there were times that, when I don't remember exactly how old I was, but my parents didn't teach me about God. They wanted it to happen in the right timing and for the right reasons, and possibly I think they wanted it to come from me first. And so my mom had been praying over me, before she was pregnant and while she was pregnant, and there were certain things that she prayed over me, like I forget what they were, but it was like faith and wisdom and love and stuff like that. And those are the things that I ended up praying for later for myself, like crazy. But we were driving to Walmart. I was in the car with my dad, and I can picture the day very well. Like, it was a powerful moment in my life. I have a photographic memory about certain things, and this memory was very vivid for me. Probably one of my earliest memories. I was looking out the window, and I was looking at the trees and the sidewalk, and I looked at the roads, and I was like asking myself, how did these all get here? And so I asked my dad, I was like, who put these here? How did these get here? And he was like, well, they take things that are from the earth and they turn them into other things. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. They would have to do that. Obviously, that's how everything works. I mean, I build Legos, and I take blocks and build other things out of it, and I understood that concept somewhat. That's why I was asking the question. But I asked then, I was like, okay, well, if they're using those things to build other things, who built the things that they're using to build other things with? And he was like, that's a really good question, Israel. And we pulled into Walmart, and I got out the car, and he was like, the answer is God. There's a creator of the universe, and he just told me a few things. I don't remember what he told me. I just know that that day I learned about the concept of God. And then at some point I was at the dinner table with my parents, and I was talking with them and asking questions. And I asked them, I was like, so, I mean, I think I was starting with other questions, but this was where the question got deep, and I remember it very well. I asked them, I was like, if we believe in our religion and other people believe in their own religions, then how do we know that our religion is the true religion? And they were like, that's a really good question. And they didn't have an answer that was sufficient for me, because I was thinking deeply about these things, and it didn't really make sense to me at the time. But they told me, they were like, it's faith. And I was like, so you just believe? And they were like, well, not so much, but yeah, kind of. Like, we have to choose to believe. And I was like, well, if that doesn't make us any better than anybody else, isn't that what they're doing? And they're like, well, the difference is there's evidence. Like, we have apologetics and the whole study of the evidence behind Christianity. That's not something that you find in other religions. They're trying now, because some other cults like Islam and Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses everybody's recognizes that we're the only ones that are actually defending our faith in those ways, and they can't, because they just don't, because they can't. And so nowadays they try to come up with different things that weren't there in the originals, and they're trying their hardest. But that's just, no other faith has that. And so they were trying to explain that to me, and they would show me things like, there was these videos that we would watch, Creatures That Defy Evolution, and stuff that was trying to show me that the science in our schools was wrong. And so that's young earth creationism. I don't know that I really believe in that anymore, and there's a lot of things to consider with all that that's above my head right now. But so I was asking those questions at a young age, and I remember there were times where God worked in my life in a little miracle to show me that he was real. Like, when I was in elementary school, I was walking up to the computer lab with the rest of the kids in a line right behind the teacher, and every single time we would go there, it was the most dread that I could experience. I mean, I dreaded that more than anything, because every single time I was not good at math. And we had this math program on our computer. It was this little rocket ship, and it would have a little math equation like 9 times 6, and it would give you, and there was a little countdown on the rocket ship, and once the countdown went up, the rocket went up, and that was it. If you put in your answer and you got it right, you got it. And if not, then you were set back, and it would just get the answer, the questions, the problems would get simpler and simpler, but I just sucked at it. And if you got the answers right, it would get better, and you would get like a score. And I felt like I was just horrible at it, and I couldn't do it, and I just was kind of giving up on myself and not really trying. But I tried at everything else, and I succeeded at most things in the school at that age, but I just was really bad at that. And it was because I wasn't paying attention. Like, my elementary and middle school and even high school years were all just mostly me fidgeting with my erasers and not actually paying attention. And I would cheat all throughout elementary school. I mean, all I did was cheat at a young age, and so that set me up for failure like crazy. I don't even think about that very often anymore, but whenever I do, I'm like, wow, yeah, all I remember was me sitting there building little like houses out of like erasers and using my imagination, just imagining things with my hands, like just as if it was in a different world, completely zoning out whatever I was doing, and then just copying off my neighbor. And so but we were going to this computer lab, and I didn't want to do this thing, so I prayed that God would make it so we didn't have to go. And we walked through the door, and I was praying this right before we walked up to the door, like, and then right as we walked through the door, on the intercom, they were saying, guys, go back to your class. They're cleaning in there, they're working on it. There's stuff that needs to be done in the computer lab, so go back to your class. And I was just blown away. Like, my prayer just got answered right then and there on the spot. And we were walking out, and I was telling the students, like, hey, I just prayed and God got us out of this. And the teacher was not very happy about it. And, they have their reasons that are probably pretty normal, but I, I, probably thought like, oh no, I'm gonna, it was persecution or something like that. No, I'm gonna tell all the kids like, you're not gonna shut me up about God. And I don't know if that was really what I did, but I can imagine me having that kind of attitude at that age, because I was whispering it to everybody. I continued to tell, but um, little things like that really kept me grounded whenever the moment came for me to decide what I believed. And I had been raised with some evidence, some apologetics, whether it was the creatures that defy evolution or just knowing that Jesus fulfilled prophecies and stuff like that. And also, I think that I knew, because I was raised in a good home, I knew morals, I knew right from wrong, and if you know right from wrong and you hear the teachings of Jesus, everything hits home, and you're like, okay, that's all true. You just can't deny anything that he says. And so I had enough of an understanding that when the time came for me to choose what I believed, I knew it had to be Jesus, and there was no doubt about it. I was like, okay, if there's God, I know who that God is, and I'm not wavering on that. And I also understood the concept of, if there is a God, maybe nobody knows who that God is, and it's something that we couldn't come up with. But that didn't seem to make sense to me either, because I just knew if there's a God that's as perfect and holy and crazy awesome as the one that created everything that we see here, then why would he just leave and abandon us and not have anything to do with us? So the idea that we would know nothing about God seems illogical to me. Like that would make God illogical in some sense, if he just created all of this and for nothing. Like, that's not a wise thing to do. That's not even, doesn't make sense if you're God to just do that for nothing. We do things for nothing, and we make fun of ourselves for it because we're stupid. And we wouldn't say that about something like an eternal creator of all things, the contingent source of all creation. So, where there's certain things, like the Bible says that, we know certain things about the world, like about God through creation, that his divine power and eternal, stuff like that. And so the Kalam cosmological argument is a good one for that. Like, everything that begins to exist has a cause, and that whole thing. So we know that there's a God, and we know that Occam's razor, the philosophical idea, we know that there has to be one God. There's no reason to make extra assumptions. The more you might start making extra assumptions, like there's multiple gods, and maybe they weren't eternal, all these little things like that, you get further from the simple truth that we all know. And so, one eternal creator, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, who could create a time, space, matter universe, and all of that. And that's the Christian God. That is the Christian God. You will not find that concept in other religions. They can't defend their religions the way that we can. We can use philosophy, theology. We can really show. They call it transcendental. There's just certain truths that just transcend everything, that any lie, and they rise to the surface, and it's just obvious. And the Bible confirms all of those things. I'm preaching a lot, but I'm also telling my testimony, and I think that I'm going to do both right now. But so I had been raised in a world where I knew certain things, and I had a lot of evidence in my life. I also had a keen understanding of human behavior. My dad called it discernment. For a long time, I didn't talk with anybody about what I was thinking, but then when I would tell my dad some of these stories at school, he started to realize and tell me, no, you have the same gift that I have. It's called discernment. It really, I remember, when I started to notice that there was these different crowds in elementary school. They would separate into the popular crowds who were mean to everybody, and that was how they got people in, and there was initiation and all that. And then the nerds, the way that they treated them, and the ways that they separated from the popular crowd, and the pretty girls and how they were all wanted, and so they would hang out with all those kinds of things. I knew there was reasons for it, and I wasn't just blindly following all of these patterns like I was just a sheep. I was kind of standing in the background with my arms folded and just looking at all of everybody, just I don't want to play these games. And I didn't really fit in for that reason. At the same time that I fit in with everybody to a sense, because I understood everybody and I got on everybody's level. And the popular kids kind of liked me for it. I noticed that they kind of liked me. We were playing Foursquare together every single day. and I was in with that crowd to a degree, but I separated myself from them, and I think that even caused me to gain a little bit of respect. But what happened really, I I couldn't tell you all the times that I was seeing things and interacting in those ways, but that when I really used my discernment, I was talking to my dad about the things I was noticing, and he was giving me a lot of encouragement, telling me, "You are right, son. You're not crazy, and just because other people aren't talking about these things in your class doesn't mean that you're not right." And there are going to come moments where you're going to have to be bold and say the truth, and you might get gaslit and told that you're wrong, but just it's true, and you can come to me and talk to me, and I'm going to tell you about everything, and you're going to know that you're right. And so I remember when it all really I first used my bravery that he had tried to instill in me. Ian Aiken, he was a kid in my class that was kind of the head of the popular crowd, and he was the biggest bully of them all. Um, and also cool and attractive in all of those kinds of ways. He was nice to people. He would choose certain people to be nice to and cool with, and choose certain people to not. He was the kind of the one who would separate everybody into their groups, and initiated people into the popular crowd, and judged everybody's clothing and basically set all the trends. And so I recognized all of those things, and I didn't like him for it. And one day I got into a bit of an argument with him somehow. I think I just, in that moment, I was just feeling this urge, like I have to say something. I'm not crazy. I know what he's up to. And I told him, I was like, I know what you're doing. And I don't remember what he was doing. He was being himself, as he has always, and he was really, his human behavior was very much like I'm saying. And he would separate people into their groups and be the way that he was all the time. And so at one point I just got so fed up with it. I was like, I know what you're doing. And he had the same gift of discernment, I'm sure. That's why he was able to manipulate. And so I instantly kind of looked me in the eyes and realized I did know something. And he was like, okay, what? And it was just me and him at this point. I think everybody else kind of like was watching at a distance, and it was just me and him. All I remember was it was just me and him in this moment, and him looking at me and like kind of challenging me, like, oh yeah, you think you know something? Tell me, what do you know? And I looked at him and I said, and I just started calling out the specific things, like, you just did this, and this is the reason why, and this is all what you are, and it's because you're insecure, and it's because you actually need validation and those kinds of things. I've been learning that from my parents, and I could sort of sense that, but that was the wisdom more that I had gained from my parents through telling them what I was seeing. And when I told him that, he just looked at me and he goes, yeah, you're right. So what? And I just didn't know what to say. I felt an intense rush of relief, like, finally, I'm confirmed in what, I'm not crazy, like, this is true. But at the same time I was shocked, like, what do you mean so what? Like, this isn't a so what, like, this is you need to change. Like, how is this something that you're cool with? You're accepting your own insecurities right now, and allowing yourself to control the world around you because of them. And so, but he had made his choice, obviously. He knew what he was up to, and I'm sure he had family that influenced him in that area and taught him how to be the man he was. I remember he was into all the secular music I wasn't into. His dad was scary. I remember that. I never actually met his dad, but I knew that his dad was scary. And so I'm sure that he had gotten all of that from his family. His dad probably was peaked in high school and thought that he was the same macho guy all his life, and just thought, I'm going to pass that on to my kids. My kids aren't going to be losers. And so he probably ended up just like that because of his dad. And I ended up the way that I did because of my dad. And I'm really glad that I had the dad I did, because I did not want to become anything like Ian. And so there were other moments that I had done, I used my discernment, and from that day on, Ian respected me. He didn't really pick on me ever, and I think it's because he knew that I didn't play those games, and I knew what games he was playing, so there was no point in even trying. But there was still a separation, and I was the one causing that separation, because he probably wanted to be my friend. And actually, I forget to mention, but we really did become friends. Like, he was a part of our group for a long time, like, and I actually forget about that all up until this day, because I always see him as the person I didn't want to be around. But I ended up becoming he was in my friend group, not by my choice, but by other friends in the group, and we would stay up all night and have all sorts of fun all the time, and they would ditch me all the time, and sometimes we would run off and ditch someone else, and I was getting ditched all the time, I'm sure Ian wanted to ditch me because of our problems together. But anyways, that's to say my childhood had a lot of reality in it, and so that made a big difference when other things happened at a later age. But um, I started getting into weed whenever, and I had set up my mind that I wasn't going to do these things. I was really trying to take my dad's advice, like, you don't want to open up those doors, they're gateways and all that stuff. You just stay away from all of it. And I was trying to do that, and I didn't hang out with the popular crowd much. But as I got older, I started to want to, and I would try to kind of become friends with these guys, but only on a surface level, and they wouldn't really let me in their circle so much. And I think it was God protecting me, but um, I was friends with the popular crowds when they were sitting next to me in class, or when we were at the same lunch table or something like that. That was pretty much the extent of my friends being the popular crowd. I was always fitting in with the ones who were just in the middle, like the ones that weren't total nerds that I couldn't even hang out with them because they weren't like me, but the ones who were kind of like accepted by the popular crowd but wouldn't hang around them because they didn't want to bring their image down. And so but where was I going with that? Well, I started getting into weed, and my best friend Jacob, that we had grown up in youth group together, and for the longest time, I had a couple best friends that had in my life at this time, but he was one that I was hanging out with for every single night practically for a long time. And we met through youth group, and I dated his sister. She was kind of like my first girlfriend, really, for a long time. Not my first girlfriend. My first girlfriend was in elementary school, and there's a whole story to that too. Childhood traumas with that. I've told Pamela about that a little bit, and it's really sad. But she, I was hanging out with Jacob a lot, and we got into weed together. I can't remember how that all started right now off the top of my head, but it doesn't really matter. We got into stealing alcohol together, and doing bottle runs at stores, and getting super drunk and just experimenting like that. And it was all new to us, and we were just kind of brave and daredevilous, or fearless and daredevils about it. And me and him both had that sense of like rebellion and no fear, and so we kind of went headfirst into a lot of problems. But weed was so much fun. I mean, I would sneak out, and we would just get so high and have the best times. And and then another influence came into my life, and this was the perfect influence for me. If there was anybody who could have influenced me into doing what I did, it would be this person. She was absolutely the most beautiful girl that I had ever seen, and she was more mature than me. She was a little bit older than me, and she was very, very seductive and humble at the same time. Like she treated me well at the same time that she was just extremely seductive towards me. And I knew she liked me because there were certain moments where she let me sit on her lap at times, and like there was just like kind of she would hang out at my house, and whenever we were at my house, she would get a little bit more close to me and all that. But I hadn't gotten that kind of attention growing up, not really. And so I got that kind of attention when I was outside of my hometown, and then when I come back home, because I had not really been dating anybody, people assumed I might be gay. I found out that so many girls that I liked actually had a bit of a crush on me, but they just didn't approach me. And I still to this day believe it was a lot of God protecting me. But I was hanging out with her, constantly skipping. I was in this like college program in high school, free college, and we were skipping class every single day to just smoke weed, and skipping school in all sorts of areas and sneaking out constantly. I mean, I'd be at home, it would be nighttime or dinner time or whatever, and I'd just get a text from, hey, want to go? I'm outside, like come sneak out your window, and I would just get in her car, and we would go to the park 2 minutes down the road and just smoke a bunch of weed and have these awesome talks. And I was so totally in love with her. She had a boyfriend that was kind of abusive, and I thought I was going to be the one to take his place because I wasn't like that. But she obviously had her patterns and her men that she was attracted to in those sad ways. But she told me one night as we were smoking, she was like, have you done any other drugs? And I was like, no. She's like, I've done a lot of other drugs. And I did not know that about her, and I was like really shocked when she told me. She told me some crazy stories, like snorting cocaine off of strippers, parts and in a bathroom with her mom and some really bad things like that. And I was like just blown away. I was like, I had no idea that you had this kind of dysfunction going on. Also, her dad was friends with my dad, and he lived right nearby, and they knew each other, and that was all kind of coincidence. She ended up in my life on her own, and then I found out that our families were connected, or unless our families connected afterwards after that naturally. But she convinced me to look into acid. She was like, I did acid yesterday, and it was so much fun, and it's totally fine, and it's not a big deal, and it's not addictive, and it's this drug where you get to see things that aren't real. And I was like, I had never heard of hallucinations. I had never heard of these kinds of drugs. I had no concept for these things. And she was like, I was in my room and I was just looking at the wall, and there was all these pretty palm trees just dancing on the wall, and the colors were changing, and it was just like the malls were melting, and it was really pretty and really mellow and just nice. And so I thought, well, that all sounds really cool, but I'm not going to do anything other than weed. Like, I already made up my mind about that. And I had my dad's wisdom, and I was trying to explain to her what my dad's wisdom was that I had accepted. And she was like, I get all that, and that's good, but do some research. And I was like, okay, I can't say no to doing research. Like, that's never a bad thing, right? So I was like, I'll do some research, but I'm not going to do it. And I think I ended up saying I probably won't do it. I got a little closer, and I ended up doing research, and immediately I was hooked on the research. I was like, whoa, like, what is this stuff? Like, this stuff is like real magic that exists that comes from the earth, and it's so easily accessible. Like, I thought, magic was this thing that you had to like be a witch and know all these things, and like I had like dreams at a young age that were about. I had a dream when I was really young that a witch came up to me, and it was like there was a book, and it was a book of dark black magic, and that I could use it to control the world around me to get whatever I wanted, and I knew that it was bad, but that I wanted that power, and she was like trying to teach me these things, and I told my mom about that dream, and she was just like, rebuke that in Jesus' name, like no way. But the devil was setting me up for those things. I was drawing psychedelic art at a really young age. All my art was psychedelic. It was all abstract. I'm not going to say for sure that was all the devil. I'm sure part of it's just God's, personality that gave me or whatever. And the family I was raised in, my mom drew that way somewhat, all abstract and stuff. So I had reasons to do that. But because also it's way easier than trying to draw anything realistic. So, it just came naturally. But I was really intrigued by this research, and I kept researching it like day and night, like just for weeks and weeks. It felt like for a really long time. It might have only been like 2 weeks or something like that, but I was figuring out what questions I needed answered. Like, what are the pros and cons? What are the risks? What are the problems? Is anybody getting harmed? What's going on with these things? Like, and I found out all the answers to all those questions. I had been going on Reddit pages and hearing people's trip reports, and then listening to people's advice, and I knew all the inside outs of this stuff, and so I was ready to try it at a certain point. When I did this research, it was when I made up my mind that I'm going to try this at some point. There's just no way I'm going to not. Like, I have to try it. And so, but through my research, I was really trying to figure out what are the risks. If there's more risk, then maybe I shouldn't. And I was seeing that there was more reward than risk on the internet. And I don't know how much of the enemy was able to manipulate my own searches to give me the right information, because it seemed like I was only finding good information, no bad information. And whenever I got out of drugs, I was able to find plenty of bad information on the internet that I never saw before. And I don't know, I'm not trying to say that was all the enemy, or if it was just me and my own confirmation biases through what I was researching and ignoring the parts I didn't want to see. But I was hooked on it. And then whenever I decided, I was trying to hit up this girl that was my friend, and she was suddenly, all of a sudden, way too busy for me. She couldn't even smoke weed with me anymore. She was like ignoring my texts, like, flaking on me, saying we were going to do it, and then never showing up. And it was like pissing me off like crazy. And I just was like, okay, at a certain point I was like, I can't get it through her. And I was like, I guess I have to find it somewhere else. And my weed dealer was a guy that I knew in school. He was a good friend of mine. And I asked him if he knew anybody. He was like, no, don't do that stuff, just don't. And I was like, no, I'm gonna do it either way. He's like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, all right, well, fine, my sister, she sells other things, and I can get it, through her for you. And I ended up, me and Jacob came, we had got a ride from my weed dealer friend, his name was Zach, and he brought us up in his red truck all the way up to his sister's house, and it was an apartment, like a duplex apartment type thing, and we went up there and knocked on the door, and she gave us the stuff, and it was wrapped in tinfoil. It was these little white pieces of paper with just the black line separating where we would pull them apart. And I think they were microdose tabs because they were really weak. Like we had one each because we were trying to start small, and we were, several hours went by and we didn't experience a single thing. And we thought it was supposed to hit in at least an hour, probably maybe two. But it's been like 4 hours, 5 hours, and nothing's happened. And we were giving up on it. We thought for sure we got scammed. And we went into his room, and at a certain point, all of a sudden it did hit me. And I was looking at my sweatpants, and I saw like what looked like the Mayan calendar shifting and going in circles and changing. And I was like, whoa, like that's the Mayan calendar I'm looking at. And funny enough, I mean, my birthday is the end of the Mayan calendar. I don't know if that's tied to it, but I went over into the bathroom, and then I saw the towel on the towel rack. It was just like melting, and it was colors were changing a little bit, and there was patterns, and I was like, okay, so this is real, like this. And I was blown away by what I was seeing. It wasn't that intense, but it was enough to keep me like, wow, I gotta try more of this now. And so I ended up taking more and realizing that's where it was. I just had to take more, and now I was really tripping. And my friend Jacob, he had taken the same amount with me after that, and he didn't really have the same experience. He never even saw visual hallucinations until the story I'm going to get into. And so he wasn't really prepared for what we ended up getting into. But I was doing it. I eventually, I saved all of my money. If I had lunch money, if I had tour money, I pretended to use it on other things so that my mom didn't know, and I would be saving all of it up for acid. And I got, I was getting it, and I ended up having these incredible experiences in my room at night. My room was basically already set up for a trip. Like I had a crazy awesome speaker system and a TV and a game system and black lights everywhere and just really good decorations and color changing stuff, and just like it was a great room for that. And I would sit there, I had my Audio Technica studio producer headphones that I would plug into the stereo and turn it up as loud as I want, sit there on my carpet and just listen to music while I was tripping and smoke weed on top of it, and it was just incredible. I mean, I'd be crying all night long just because of the amazement of the euphoria. And so, and I remember the song that really, the first song that I started listening to was Welcome to the Machine by Pink Floyd. And the song is about a really deep, real concept that's a Christian concept, and I didn't fully understand how this song was portraying it because it's so deep and prophetic. It was too much. It was above my head, but I knew that the imagery at least was something that I connected with, and it would make me cry every time I would hear it. And that changed that song forever for me. I'd be on my bike riding home from school sober and just crying every time I heard the song. And that song is really deep. It's talking about how this world is like a big machine of control, and there's people at the top who are controlling everybody at the bottom, and we get these prepackaged, plastic wrapped conceptions of what our lives are supposed to look like. And so it says in the song, like, you dreamed, what did you dream? We told you what to dream. You dreamed of a big star. He played a mean guitar. He loved to eat at the steak bar and drive his Jaguar. And welcome to the machine. And that's the machine telling you what you think you need, and it's to make you a certain cog in the machine for its own purposes, and while it keeps you happy thinking that you created your own dream and it was one that was handed down to you for a reason. And so it's the machine. So anyways, eventually I lost access to my acid because the weed dealer the dealer I was getting it from, she had taken all of her money, had it hidden in a pill bottle, and someone threw that pill bottle away on accident, and she lost all of her money, thousands and thousands of dollars. So she was no longer a dealer, and so, but then I was waiting around to find it again and doing my best to try to find it, and I was on Snapchat one day, and somebody that I didn't even know that I had on there had taken a picture of themselves with an acid tab on their tongue, and I was like, oh, well, she has access. So I texted her, and she got me in contact with a plug. And it was actually somebody that I worked at Subway at the time. It was my first and only job, and I had worked with somebody that only was there for like a week because she wasn't showing up most of the time, and she had a bad attitude and everything, and so she got fired. My new acid dealer was this same coworker of mine. So I walk up to meet her, and she's like, "Oh, it's you," and I was like, "Yeah, you. Like, what the heck?" And so she gave me the acid, and I took it, and I went home on the bus tripping, and I was just like, it was a whole different thing. It was like, this is real acid. Like, that stuff I had was like something not even close to this. And I got home and I took a second tab, and then I was stripping even better, and it was just like, suddenly it was no longer just me looking at the carpet and being able to see the patterns on the carpet. It was the patterns were all encompassing everything, and like changing 3D. It was like 2D visuals to 3D visuals, and smoking weed on top of it was what was really creating that kind of illusion. And so I hit up my friend Jacob, and I was like, "You're gonna have to try this. Like, you don't even know what acid is until you try this tonight." And he had never tripped visually. He hadn't seen anything yet, and I convinced him to really, really try this with me tonight. So then when he got there, I took a third tab, and I gave him one, and then I convinced him to get a second one, so he took two. And I was telling him all of my research. I was like, "Look, nothing is going to happen to us that we can't handle. Like, we're going to survive, for one. So whatever happens, and we're going to survive. We're going to come out of it, and we're probably not going to regret it, because all my research was telling me, take a heroic dose of psychedelics. Take a really big dose, and you might hate it, but it'll change your life." And so that's kind of how I was viewing it. Like, I had that fearless, brave, like, just daredevil, like, let's just go and see what this thing's all about. And I had with me also a bag of weed, a normal amount for me, and then, which was quite a bit, and then a bag of weed that my dealer sold me when he didn't have other weed, and it was his personal stash that was much, much stronger and much more expensive. So I had all this weed with us, and we went over to the park. I tried to sneak out, and I had this complicated way of sneaking out. I had to wait until my parents were snoring, and then I would go right across from their bedroom into the garage, and then I would grab my bike, bring it right past their bedroom again, over into my room, close all the doors as silently as possible, put my bike through the window into the bushes, and as quietly as possible and as slowly as possible, get all of my stuff, crawl out the window, and then get on my bike and ride over to Jacob's house. And that's how I would sneak out all the time. Well, I had gotten all of my stuff ready with my weed in my backpack and everything, and I had my bike set up, and I had my coat on, and all of a sudden my mom walks in the door, and she's like, "Oh, like, you're sneaking out?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess I am. I'm sorry." And she's like, she took my phone, and there was a text about acid from Jacob, and she read it, and it said, "Make sure you give me the acid when I get there so that I get high quicker." And I mean, it was a kind of dumb thing for him to say, even just like, I'm just so stupid even saying that that's what he said, but he said that. And so she was like, "You were going to do acid?" And I was good at lying at this age, and I was like, "Wait, what? No, that's a typo." And she was like, "No." She went into the bathroom, or she was looking through it, and then she went into the bathroom. She came back out, gave me my phone, and told me, "You're in trouble. I'm going to go talk with your dad." And then she left me with my phone. And the moment she walked out of my room, I texted Jacob, "Delete this message. My mom saw the text about acid. We have to make it a typo. So then delete this message." And I sent that to him, and then I just was like, "Dude, you said acid. Now my mom thinks we were going to do acid." And he was like, perfectly playing it off like he was laughing about it. Like, "Well, yeah, my mom would know. Knows I would never do acid," and stuff like that. And then she walks in the room, grabs my phone, and is looking through it more. And then she was convinced by those text messages, and somewhat at least. And she went back to bed, I thought. And I took my bike, and I was like, "Jacob, just meet me over here. We're gonna go to the park nearby." So we walked over to the park. My mom had put my bike, of course, back in the garage and everything, and so I walked with him over to the park. It was like a 2-minute walk from my house, and we that's when I gave him this 2 tabs, and I had already taken 3, and he could see that I was able to handle whatever I was going through, and I think that gave him some confidence. And so we get to the park and we get into the public bathroom, and we figured, the cops show up at like 10 o'clock at this park, and they use their spotlight and search the whole thing, and we would always hide behind a bush or something, but we knew that all they do is drive through. They aren't going to get out of their car and go into these public bathrooms that are out there and check for people. So it was a place to stay warm, a place to have access to water, a bathroom, and the hand dryers to warm ourselves up if we wanted to, and light, and no trouble. So nobody really went out to this park except for us at night. So we knew that we weren't going to run into people, and so we were in there. It was a perfect place, and we're tripping super hard. I'm looking around, and it's like there's this. It's everything that's translucent. So when I say I'm seeing something, it's not like it looks like it's real. It's more of a translucent, watery kind of like 3D figure of whatever I was seeing. And I saw what looked like this Medusa head that was like had this snakes wrapping all around the stalls, and it seemed pretty consistent. It looked like I could see that there more than once. Like I would look over and I would still see it there. And I was closing my eyes, and I was just like flying through these shapes, and there was like cross. I would see Jesus, I would see other things, and I was like blown away. And I would look at the walls, and everything looked like as if it had like bugs and snakes underneath the surface, like causing it to like underneath the surface of everything, like as if it was like underneath your skin, and you can just see them kind of like crawling underneath. And it looked really real, like it just, and it was really scary actually, but I was so intrigued by it because I'm this artistic person that loves art, and so everything that I was seeing was just transcendent art to me. It was sacred geometry, like they like to call it. And so, and of course the colors are changing, everything is just moving all at once, and I'm looking at my arms, and I can literally see like what looks like my hairs are like as if they're like Indians running, and there's like buffalo, and I'm just like blown away at the stuff that I'm seeing, and I can see these little people dancing on my arm and stuff, and I was closing my eyes and just having these visions, but we smoked through like all of the weed that I had. He was really hesitant to do it because every single hit you can immediately notice the difference. It takes you completely way higher, and it changes everything about this acid. Like if you just did it without weed, you're going to see these visuals, but you can tell that it's not the real world. And then when you smoke weed, it's like it makes it more 3D, and all of a sudden it's like it encompasses everything, and now you can't even see the real world as much anymore. And so we're sitting there, and I was like, okay, so my research tells me that we have to talk about something cool. That's how we're going to have fun. And so I was like, what's the coolest thing we could talk about? And I took that question very seriously. I was like, it can't be, like a lot of kids at school, like they'll talk about like their Dungeons and Dragons, and that's their fantasy world is cool to them, but what's the coolest thing in reality that we can talk about? And I was like, the logical conclusion came to me immediately. It was like, well, it can't be anything but God. And I was like, whoa, it's God. Like I had been raised in the church, and somehow all of it was boring to me up until that moment. And I realized that it wasn't a church service that made me tired and bored that we were talking about anymore. It was the creator of the universe. It was the one that is all everywhere all at once and sees me in this room right now and knows my thoughts and has created my body and my hands and my feet and my eyes that see right now and my mind that can think and has a plan and is literally in control of everything and can do anything at any time. That's who I was realizing. And I was like, okay, like this is different. Like, and I just looked up and I was like, we should talk about God. And Jacob was sitting next to me. We're leaned up against the wall, just sitting there like crisscross applesauce on the ground. And when I looked over at him, he was looking away from me, and he was uncomfortable, and he was like, I don't know, or something like that. And I all of a sudden I see his reaction, and I felt the same reaction in me for a second, because we were friends. We were into sin together. We didn't want to acknowledge these things together. We were in youth group making fun of the stuff we were learning and making jokes out of everything because we were the class clowns. And suddenly I realized that we were hiding from God. Because in that moment when I realized that God was real and that was the most important thing, I didn't want to hide from it. But then when I saw him react the way that he did when I was like, we should talk about God, I felt the same reaction for a second, and immediately I was like, oh no, what is that? Like, there's a part of me that wants to hide from God, and it's because of my sin. It's obviously because of my sin. All this stuff is hitting you really instantly, because it's just like your mind can just think of these things, like it can follow the whole logic trail in a second, and you have to catch up with your own thoughts. And I look over at him, and I was like, Jacob, and he looks at me in the eyes, and I go, we need to talk about God. And he was like, it all of a sudden hit him all at once too, and he was like, we do need to talk about God. And then I was like, why aren't we talking about God? And he was like, you're right, why aren't we talking about God? And I was like, we need to talk about God. And he was like, we do. We have to talk about God. Let's talk about God. And we were like trying to talk about God. And we had both been raised in the church, so we knew some things to talk about. And also, but the thing is the church concepts that we knew were really not a whole lot of part of this. It was more of what was coming to us in the moment was just logic and philosophy and what creation reveals to you about God. Like, it's the obvious things that you don't have to learn from a church. And those were the things that were really hitting us. And we didn't know what to call it. Like, it was like we were experiencing intense euphoria, and we didn't know what that was like. And so in this moment, it was like we were having to understand what we were experiencing and feeling, and we kept calling it whatever God feels like. Like, we were like, if God is over there feeling something right now, whatever he feels, we're closer to that feeling. Like, and that probably is true, because obviously God he doesn't experience all of the pain and all of the things, the weaknesses that we have in our body. And when we die, our spirits, like the near-death experiences, people, they feel incredible when they die. It's like all of a sudden they have this life and energy, and like all of the weaknesses of the flesh are just gone. And that can be what's happening on psychedelics and other drugs that give you euphoria. It's like you're connecting with your spirit a little bit more or something like that. And so we were like, this is what God feels like. And every single time we would say that, we were like trying to remind ourselves, we're not God. Like, if this is what God feels like, but we're not God. And because we knew that instinctively, we're realizing how big God is, and that makes you feel really, really small. So we knew we weren't God. But we were at a certain point, when we were talking and discussing these things, we were really realizing our sin, like, and it was scaring both of us. Like, anytime that somehow an interaction that we would have would be tied to some sort of sin in our life, we would notice it instantly and like literally shriek in fear of it, like, and try to push it away, like as if it was something that wanted to control us that we had to literally stop. And Paul talks about, I do the things that I don't want to do, and I don't do the things that I want to do, and it's not me, it's sin in me that does it. And also the whole world lies under the sway of the evil one, and so there's a lot of control outside of us that has to do with our sin, and that's, I think, what we were sensing in that moment. And we were hugging, and like it was like we were like children again. Like, we were, all of the boundaries that we had set and the limitations on our lives were just gone. Like, we were crying in front of each other, saying I love you, and like hugging and like laughing and acting like children. And then the moment that any sort of embarrassment or remembrance of how we would used to act would come in and try to shame us for feeling the way that we were, it was like we would have to push it away, because it was this sin thing that we didn't want. And we were having these deep conversations, and then we were understanding the same things at the same time, and so we were using less words. Like, it was like we could complete each other's sentences, and then we were using less words, and there were times where it felt like we weren't using any words at all, like as if we were telecommunicating. And he looks at me and he goes, are we telecommunicating? And I had done research all this time, and I had heard people's stories where they believed they were telecommunicating. So I was like, yeah, I think we are, because this can happen. Like, other people say they experience telecommunication. And what I really think was that I think there is somewhat of a reality to that, because we're connected in the spirit, and when people have their near-death experiences and they're communicating with either God or other people in the spirit realm, it's a telecommunication. It's just a knowing when they look at each other. It's not like they're using words. And words are only necessary because of our limitations as humans, so it only makes sense. But I think we were reading each other's body language a lot, and we didn't understand body language. We didn't know what that was, so we didn't realize that a lot of it wasn't necessarily telecommunication. It was a lot of us reading each other's body language and just understanding what we were communicating through our bodies. And so we were really kind of intrigued by that. But then at a certain point, he started to really lose grip of himself. And I remember, I think it really kind of started with, he said that he saw us in these white robes, and he was saying these things that I didn't understand, and he could tell that I wasn't having the same experience. And because we thought we were having this shared experience, I could notice that he was kind of like feeling like a little bit like, what's going on here? Like, thought we were on the same page, and maybe I'm delusional, maybe I'm crazy. And all of a sudden it turned into, eventually we were just standing up in front of each other, and we're realizing like this is too much for us, and he's starting to completely lose grip, to where like all of a sudden he just like folds his arms, and then he